All right. All right. Welcome back to another special episode of The Unknown. Michael Volpe, that's my name, and I write at michaelvolpe.substack.com. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. My broadcast partner is Richard Luthman, and he's somewhere around Fort Myers, Florida. And I love to say it's Lee County after the loser of the Civil War. He's so proud of being named after being in the county named after Robert E. Lee. And we are joined by State Senator from South Dakota, Tom Pischke. And I hopefully I got the last. I should have asked you beforehand, but I got the last name right. I
Yes, you did pronounce it right.
pronounced. Uh, and we wanted to have you on the broadcast. You have proposed several bills. Some of them didn't get through, but and I don't know if any of them are law yet, but one of them has gotten at least through the committee. And so you're a proponent of 50-50. I'm going to actually do it differently than we normally do it because Rich, he I don't know if love is 50-50 is the right word, but definitely supports it. I'm more against it, but so I'll have you start with some questions.
Okay, so the first question is more of a scene setter. And doing research about your history, it shows that your own divorce and custody fight played a role in bringing the issues about family court to your consciousness. So how did that shape your perspective, your own experience, and how does it motivate your work to take on the issues of custody and child support reform in South Dakota?
Yeah, great question. First and foremost, just thank you for having me on the show today, and be here to explain, my views on some of these issues. So, yeah, obviously, I did go through divorce and had a custody issue back in 2014, and it's through that experience that actually propelled me to run for the state legislature here in South Dakota. I went from a father of three children that had an active role in their upbringing. They were all little children at the time, under the age of 5, and I was involved in getting up in the middle of the night, giving them bottles, changing diapers, taking them to daycare, giving baths, doing everything that a father does. Well, I assume as a active father does for those early childhood years. And unfortunately, their mother and we went through a pretty I want to say kind of a nasty divorce. It was a lot of mudslinging. And through that whole experience, I ended up with basically just becoming a visitor in their lives, especially during the time um, when the court wasn't settled. We're in that temporary phase. I basically only got to see them every other Saturday afternoon. And so that's just a shock, right? That's a big shock to someone who's deeply involved and loves their children greatly, and then all of a sudden you just become this every other Saturday afternoon visitor. So, the court schedule finally got settled. I still became only two overnight parent a month. I get them Saturday morning, keep them till Sunday evening, every other weekend, and then only had like 7 days, or actually 14 days of parenting time in the summer. And so I just thought that's completely bogus. That's not fair. And I wanted to do something to change that because if this is the way it happens in family court in South Dakota or everywhere it seems, I didn't think that was right. And so I wanted to be something instead of just complaining about it. I wanted to be somebody that actually makes the change. I thought that was the right thing to do. So I decided to run for the state legislature, and that was in 2016 that I made that decision. Here we are 10 years later, and I'm still working on trying to fix that in South Dakota.
Okay, so then let's talk about this custody bill, the bill that you're pushing right now. This session, you introduced SB 224, which would create a rebuttable presumption of joint physical custody of children in divorce cases. For those unfamiliar, can you explain what that means in practical terms? And also, why do you believe making 50-50 shared parenting the default arrangement is in the best interests of children and families?
Sure. Okay. Thank you for the question. So, Senate Bill 224 is basically just a starting point. So, and it says in your initial determination. So, it's not going to open it up to everybody that's already had their determination. It's only people that are going in for their initial determination of permanent custody. So, and all it does is it creates a starting point. It creates a presumption that says we are on the 50-yard line and it's going to be 50-50 unless you can provide evidence otherwise. And it allows for the courts to determine about domestic violence. There's 23 factors that the South Dakota takes into consideration about the on parents on both sides. And so those are all things that the court would take into consideration to move away from that rebuttable presumption. And keep in mind, this doesn't have a high standard. It's just the I forget. It's not like clear and convincing evidence. It's just the
Preponderance?
you know
Preponderance.
preponderance. There we go.
Right.
Thank you.
Which is more evidence than not, which I think
Yep.
in practice is a little hard to
1%,
understand,
right?
but
But
more
thank
than
you.
not,
Thank you
more
for
than not,
yeah.
right,
Thank you
more
for
than
getting
not.
that terminology for me. I
Right,
forgot that. So
right. Rich,
um,
go ahead.
You're saying, Tom, you're saying you're advocating for an adjudicative rule. You're not advocating for a substantive provision of the law, saying that 50-50 is the substantive policy of the state. You're saying that when you walk into a court, the adjudication rule is we're starting in the middle.
that's right.
That a fair? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And I would acknowledge that I understand that 50-50 is not going to work in all situations. I think we have to be palms up and acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean that the judges should put away their bias, or shouldn't put away their bias and start at that presumption. If every judge would do that, we wouldn't need this law. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Not all judges are created equal. So, and that's what the legislature does. It tells the judicial branch what to do. That's what we do as lawmakers. When criminals are sentenced, we set sentences guidelines. That's what the legislature does. And that's exactly what this legislation aims to do, is tell the judges, when you have two parents in front of you that are fighting over custody, start here.
All right. So I'm going to give the devil's advocate position. I think Mike will jump in after this. Opponents of the custody reform that you've proposed, have raised concerns. For example, the South Dakota Trial Lawyers Association argued that judges already award joint custody when it's appropriate, and warned a one-size-fits-all mandate could oversimplify complex family situations. Domestic violence advocates, worry that presumptive 50-50 splits may inadvertently empower abusers or force trauma survivors into continued contact. Michael will raise some of these issues too. How do you respond to these critiques, and what safeguards does your SB 224 include to ensure that children and abuse victims are protected, even as you try to give fit parents equal standing?
Yeah, again, there's 23 factors that the court has to consider. And getting back to the first question about the trial lawyers say that this is already happening. If that was already happening, then why would someone like myself who is involved in my kids' lives, be reduced to a visitor? Why would we continue to have people, not only just men, but I've had women come and testify for this bill as well, because they became visitors in their kids' lives who were fit, willing, and loving and wanted to be there. Why would that continue to happen year after year after year if the judges were doing this correctly? That's nonsense in my mind. I have, again, a group of guys that are up here as brand new. They haven't been in this fight for very long, and they're now coming saying, "Hey." Actually, one gentleman, I was giving an example, he has 50-50 with his 15-year-old daughter, and then he had an oopsie with another mother, and that newborn child, now all of a sudden he has to be a visitor for that child. A different judge, different situation. So again, you have one judge that's given 50-50 for one child for this guy, but treats him like a visitor for another child. It just doesn't make any sense. So to say that the judges are doing this is just not correct. Getting back to the other,
you think the lawyers are driving the acrimony?
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Did they in your case?
And why did they want?
Did they in your case, do you think?
Did they in my case?
Do you think?
Yeah, did they prolong it? Did they manufacture issues? Did they drive out things? Did they hit you with ex parte orders that you didn't have a chance to speak for months? Did they play lawyer tricks on you as opposed to look at the substantive facts?
Well, in my case specifically, they just tried to throw as much mud at the wall as they could, try to treat me,
All of a sudden you were abuser,
all of a sudden
terrible person.
I'm the worst person in the world. You know,
Right.
they drag up everything that I've ever done wrong in my life,
How
and throw
does
that out there, and it's like, how am I supposed to, you know? And
I,
then if you don't have a good lawyer to defend you against that,
right.
it just makes you look like you're just a terrible person. So,
Right, but also
but
if you have a good lawyer, that's not cheap. So even if you defend against that, all of a
yeah,
sudden all your wealth is drained. But I
yeah.
my I have several issues with 50/50, and I'm going to get a visual aid up. My first problem is I'll show you what happened in Australia, but they had far less factors. There wasn't anywhere near 23. Um, but starting at 50/50, in my opinion, I how do I say it? There's no evidence that 50/50 is better on a mass scale than 60/40, 65/35. As one woman told me, custody isn't cookie cutter. And so by saying 50/50, you are, whether you want to like frame it this way or not, but you are saying that it's the best because that's where you're starting at. But what's the evidence that 50/50 on any mass scale is better than 65/35, 60/40, or 75/25?
Well, I mean, I think every situation's different, right? And so if you can't do exactly 50/50 because of travel schedules or whatever that may be, sure, um I think that you can move to a situation that is like more like 60/40 or 65/35, whatever it may be in those situations. But when you don't have that starting point and you give the leverage to one person, then you're starting from the other way, right? And then you're starting from a 90/10 situation and trying to claw your way back to the other side. And that's what we've been doing here for years, and that doesn't work. Then you end up in a situation where one person is basically getting just Saturday every other week.
All right, and I think Idaho is right near you guys. This is more the way the law is written now, and my understanding is they may change this. But you start with joint custody, and that the presumption is both parents should have a lot of time, without saying what a lot is. And I think that's better. The the other problem, and do we indulge me for a minute? I'm going to play 4 minutes from Australia. So this was, I think he's no longer an MP, but his name is Graham Parrott. So in Australia for about 20 years, they had something similar to what you had, and they then repealed it in late 2023. This is the reason I play this all the time is because it's my favorite takedown of 50/50.
Matter rally. Sadly, we can't say the same about domestic violence. The experts have been giving us advice since 2006 when the equal shared parental responsibility provisions were first included in the Family Law Act. The Shadow Attorney General Nicola Roxon's second reading speech to the Family Law Amendment Shared Parental Responsibility Bill 2005 said, and I quote, "Some victims of family violence may develop the false view that they cannot stop their abuser from having contact with their children. I'm advised by some service providers in the sector that this is already happening, mostly involving women who, despite their fears and concerns, feel that new laws mean they will have to accept equal time. In report after report, concerns have been raised about the presumption of equal shared parental responsibility. This bill implements the first of the three urgent priorities put forward by the Women's Legal Service. This bill repeals Section 61DA of the Family Law Act. That section contains a presumption that it is in the best interest of the child for the child's parents to have equal shared parental responsibility for the child. There are two exceptions to the presumption: where there is abuse of the child or another family member, or there is family violence. Although these exceptions are in the legislation, they have not been effective in preventing inappropriate applications of that presumption. Research shows that the exceptions are not often applied. Parents are forced to continue their parental relationship even when there is a history of family violence. A report published by the Australian Institute of Family Studies in 2010, evaluating the 2006 amendments, found that where both family violence and child abuse had been alleged, over 75% of cases resulted in orders for equal shared parental responsibility. Where the allegation only concerned family violence, almost 80% resulted in orders for equal shared parental responsibility. It is clear that the 2006 exceptions don't work as Attorney General Ruddock intended. A report by the Australian Institute for Family Studies in October 2019 found that in matters where litigation was started but resolved before judgment, orders for shared parental responsibility were made in 94% of cases. In many families, the abuse continues when parents are forced to share parental responsibility for their children after separation. Now, there is a widely held misconception that equal shared parental responsibility means equal shared care. That is, parents will spend equal time with their children, 30 minutes each per hour, effectively. This misconception sets up a false expectation that parents have some right to guaranteed equal time with their children. This can incentivise an abusive partner to litigate their parenting dispute. It may lead to a parent agreeing to an unsafe parenting arrangement in the belief they have no choice. As a judge of the Family Court of Australia, Justice Richard O'Brien observed in a 2010 speech, a law that cannot be understood by the people affected by it, or worse still, lends itself to being misunderstood, is a bad law. That is particularly so when we are talking about a law which affects families and children. Now, anyone who works on the front line of the family law sector will tell you that no two families are the same. To quote Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, all happy families are alike, but an unhappy family is unhappy after its own fashion.
So specific arguments he makes. One, even though there's always a presumption or the rebuttable presumption if there's domestic violence, in Australia, like he said, study after study showed overwhelmingly judges were ignoring that. Do you run that risk by having this? The judges will ignore it because by doing this, you're telling the judges 50-50 is best because this is where we're starting. We're starting at the best. Do you run that risk?
Well, I don't I don't claim to know what the culture is in Australia or the laws exactly are in Australia. First off, it seemed to me from watching that video that the judges were giving more credence to the idea of the presumption of joint physical custody and ignoring the factors about domestic violence and
Right.
just
Mm-hmm.
all those issues. That's not at all what I'm trying to do here in South Dakota. In fact, if you look at 25-4A-22, which is actually quoted in Senate Bill 224, we actually create a presumption the other way in law, saying that if there's allegations of abuse or any history of abuse, the presumption goes that joint physical custody is not in the best interest of the child. I can't control what the judges in Australia do. In fact, I can't hardly control what the judges in South Dakota do.
Right. I,
So, and
I,
again, not all judges are created equal. I have a lot of lack of trust with judges at times. And so
what
I'm
about the
not going to again
second?
speak to society in Australia about that
Right,
video.
right. But what about the second argument, the philosophical argument that no two families are alike, but you are creating a one size at least fits most model by saying, well, we're going to start with 50-50 and we're going to keep it unless you overcome that presumption.
Again, I reject that argument. This bill creates a starting point in the courts. It doesn't say that you have to exactly split every hour, 30 minutes with dad and 30 minutes with mom.
Mhm.
That's absolutely ridiculous, first off. That's never
Mhm.
going to happen. That doesn't happen. You can't split a year exactly in half because it's 365 days.
Right.
It's a starting point that says, hey, let's take the fight out of this. Let's stop being jackasses to each other, and let's go to a point where we can figure something out that actually gives a meaningful amount of time to each parent, so that child can have a meaningful relationship with each parent. That's what we're trying to do here.
Richard,
So
I,
Mike,
all these other false arguments are just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
I think that the Australian MP Grant Parrott's downfall comes in his own language, in the sense that he says that a law that's not understood by the people is a terrible law. He made that point. So the question becomes, what's understood by the people based on our history and tradition in law, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the English common law tradition, that the Constitution of the United States, of all the states, is built upon? When a husband and wife buy a house together, it's not 65-35, it's not 15, 85, it's 50-50. It's joint. Joint understanding is part of the law throughout. It's embedded. It's an embedded concept in the law. And to manufacture a starting point that's not where it is across the board in almost every other legal area is the tail wagging the dog. And you heard from him, this member of parliament in Australia, that they're cow-tailing, or to the domestic violence lobby. They're saying that in 10% of cases or 20% of cases where there's serious domestic violence, I don't know what that number is, but there's a vast majority more where there's no domestic violence, where you have two loving parents. They're trying to work something out. I think that Tom is advocating for a rule that fits for most people, that gives the most amount of benefit to the most amount of people. Now, of course, there are issues in specialized circumstances. Of course, there are sickos out there, and we need a system that weeds them out. But I think Tom's right. That's about the judges.
Right. Kids aren't property, though. The other problem they had in Australia, you can argue that their culture is so different that we shouldn't even look at it, but come on, they speak the same language. Their culture is similar enough. The one problem the kids had was you kept moving them back and forth because it's 50-50. They felt like they had no home in a lot of cases because you are jamming 50-50 in a lot of cases where it's not appropriate. Look, I'm not against 50-50 if it's appropriate. My philosophical problem is I don't believe that on a mass scale, it's better than 60-40, 65-35. And even when you say it's a starting point, you're saying it's better. And I don't see the evidence that it's better or worse. That's my problem with it. The property, you shouldn't treat kids like property. But my main problem is I don't think that it's better. It's not necessarily worse. But even with a starting point, you are saying it's better.
I want to ask Tom something. During the committee hearings on SB 224, you had a lot of testimony from single fathers, from family law attorneys, and they said that, across the board, that this reform that you're promoting, that you're trying to get enacted into law, would lead to healthier outcomes for kids and reduce the legal battles. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the benefits of this law that you got from the testimony?
Yeah, I think I'll try to, a little foggy on some of those quotes, but on some of those facts. But I think stats have shown that, kids have better outcomes when they have both parents involved in their lives. They have worse outcomes when they're raised by just a single parent. In fact, I think the outcomes are even worse if you compare children being raised by a single dad compared to children being raised by a single mother. Some of those outcomes, they do better in school. They do better. I forget exactly all the language. I'm a little fuzzy there. I'm sorry, but the outcomes are better when they have their father involved in their lives. Single motherhood or single children raised by single mothers have worse outcomes.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Sorry, I'm not studied up on that.
Right. No, but I agree with that. But a lot of that, as in my case, you have an unfit parent, and that's where the bad outcome comes. I don't know if you want to. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Kentucky did pass. I don't know the exact language, but there is a 50-50 presumption. I don't know if it's as strong as yours or weaker. And at roughly the same time that they passed the law, and over the next roughly 10 years, the divorce rate went down a lot, more than the national average. We should note the national average for divorce is down. So it could be a correlation, it could be causation, but are you familiar with this? And do you think this could be a benefit that it'll reduce divorces?
I think it definitely could be a benefit. Yeah. You take out that fight, you take out that reason for using leverage, using the kids as leverage in divorce. So, yeah, I think that definitely is going to be a side effect that happens if we were to pass this presumption law. And I am familiar with Kentucky.
I did want to note, or that's not, I did want to note, I looked up South Dakota's divorce rates. Yours are some of the lowest in the country. So it might be a benefit, but here we go. It's at 10% roughly of of the public is divorced in South Dakota. So even if it's a benefit, you guys in South Dakota have a really low divorce rate. So I don't know how much lower it can go. Rich,
Yeah, that's fair argument, but
right?
I still believe it's the best thing for the kids.
Right.
So Tom,
Yeah. My argument is the other one. One, I'm not sure that you can say it's causation. It might be correlation, but my argument, if it's so great, how come people are staying in unhappy marriages then? But Rich's both your guys' argument then is it, the other way creates leverage that goes away, and so people don't use the leverage and then they stay in the marriage, which I would say is an unhappy one. Because if you're getting divorced, even if you think part of the reason is use leverage, you're not in a happy marriage. But
Your
we'll
marriage doesn't
see.
have to stay unhappy.
Right? It doesn't. No, you're right. It doesn't. It doesn't.
You
We have
can
and,
you can
and
go to therapy. You can
right.
involve God
I
in
don't
your marriage too.
exactly. I don't want to get theological, but I had a priest tell me that God abhors divorce, but God's okay with separation. And sometimes you need that for a little bit to bring people back together. And that's what a priest told me. So,
Right. All
but
right.
I have a question for you, Tom. I want to switch on the topic of in terms of the topic of child support. You introduced two bills, SB 162 and SB 163 this session, aimed at changing how child support payments are calculated. Can you outline for us what problems you were trying to address, what inequities you saw with the proposals, and why do you feel these changes are necessary for non-custodial parents and families?
Yeah, okay. So I brought those bills forward because the Child Support Commission met in South Dakota here this last summer. And those were two of the proposals that I actually introduced to that commission. And so I don't remember exactly which one was which now, but one of them was about bringing back the child tax credit. So I don't know if you guys are familiar, but maybe some states do this, maybe some don't. But in South Dakota, the child tax credit at the federal level is not included as a deviation when figuring out your child support. So, for example, in my situation, I have three children. I'm not able to claim them on my federal taxes because my ex has them the majority of time, and that's what the law is. That's what the federal law is. But however, I should be able to claim them because I'm paying my full child support. I should be able to have that factored into the child support obligation or the child support calculation. And so that's what one of those pieces of legislation was about. We had this here in South Dakota prior to 2004, and they took it away for some reason. Now, the historical knowledge, I think some of the arguments is that we have a lot of farming people in South Dakota, there's a lot of self-employment, and it's hard to completely figure out what the benefit would be on some of those situations when you're self-employed and you don't really make a lot of money, and it's just another one of those deductions that sometimes it doesn't matter much when you're in the farming industry and you don't make a lot of money one year or the next. So,
If I'm hearing you work, you're taxed, and then you're required to pay child support, and that's all after tax. And what you want to do is give a tax benefit to the payment you are required to make. Am I getting that right?
well, I think that it should be figured into the child support calculation. Yes,
Okay.
because uh, because if I were to be still married, I would get the tax benefit for having three children under the age of 18 as a deductions on my taxes. But
Mhm.
since I'm not married and the children live with my ex the majority of the time, I have to pay the full amount of child support, but yet I get no benefit of the federal tax credit. So I
Okay.
just think that should be included in the calculation, like it was prior to 2004.
So these provisions were basically killed in committee, and you went to the Department of Social Services, and they pressed back at you. You brought it as legislation. I just want to
Yeah.
ask you, more about how the sausages are made. Why did you pursue this as legislation rather than waiting for the committee's recommendations? And you've been against what they've been saying. That might be the answer. They tried to raise, though they recommended a 10% increase in the payment schedule, and you've actively opposed it very loudly. What's your thinking there for the legislative strategy? You know.
Okay, well, you're kind of pivoting to the other bill here, but there's a few things there. So, as a obviously those ideas were not adopted by the Child Support Commission, but as a legislator, I'm allowed to bring any idea to any part of law that I see fit, and so I still wanted to have those conversations with my colleagues, and so that's why I brought forth the legislation. I mean, part of the problem too is that I really felt like the way that commission was run in the summer, it really doesn't give very good credence to the public. And so by bringing that legislation forward during the legislative session, the public is able to give more input on why those changes are needed. So it just gives more public input, if that makes sense. And also I I really felt like I was just ignored. Part of the problem with that commission, like obviously, child support is an important issue to me, and I have been looked over by the governors of South Dakota for being put on that commission twice now, and that doesn't make me very happy. And so I wanted to be part of that and be part of that conversation and not be an outsider. So again, that's why I brought forward the legislation to have the conversation in the committee at least. Now, moving on to the other part that you're talking about with the increases to the obligation table, I oppose those because I don't think they're necessary. If you look at how the child support system is structured in South Dakota, it's already based for inflation. Inflation affects people's incomes too. So as you make more money, you already pay a higher amount of child support in South Dakota. If you're just going to arbitrarily increase all the numbers in the obligation table, not only do you have to pay more if you make the same amount of money, you got to pay even a substantial amount of more if you make more money as a total too. So it just doesn't make sense. So you have to keep doing that.
All right.
So you have a couple of bloggers in South Dakota that don't like you, and they say that one mean blog basically said that this is a vendetta. And that you just don't like paying child support, and that's the whole thing. How do you respond to those people?
I'm gonna leave that at no comment for the bloggers. I don't want to say anything. I'm not gonna say anything on the record about any bloggers in South Dakota.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I read Bernie Goldberg's book Bias, which was the 90s, and he made the point that like if you I support any man paying child support, and you support any of the kind of reforms you're talking about now. And this was like 20 some years ago. Oh, you're for deadbeat dads, and he went on a pretty long rant in the book. Do you think that's still the case, or do people and legislators specifically are they more? I don't know if nuanced is the right word, but I assume you're like attacked. Oh, you're just want to support deadbeat dads. But is that like still the case, or are people more fair about those who want to reform the system for those paying?
Well, I'm not in favor of deadbeat dads. I'm trying to understand your question here exactly,
No,
but
the if you supported any kind of reform, the way that Bernie
oh,
framed it in the book, and this was the 1990s for the book Bias, that you were immediately painted as supporting deadbeat dads. And that's why a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't want to wade into that issue or bring forward any kind of legislation to fix it. But has that changed? Do people see, are you immediately demonized that way?
Any dad
well,
father's rights gets painted as a deadbeat dad. Any dad that talks about, it's not fair that I'm paying this, that I'm not having access to my kids is tagged as a deadbeat dad. It could be the furthest thing from the truth, but that's how the other side paints it. Are you experiencing it?
yes, that's exactly what I experienced in South Dakota, and that's
Right.
and that's what that liberal blogger thinks of me too.
Right. All right. And so, do you also get support?
Oh yeah, people that
Okay.
know me personally
Right.
know that I'm not a deadbeat dad and know that I'm not
Right.
advocating for deadbeat dads.
No, and I didn't frame the question correctly, but Bernie when he made that argument, was basically arguing all you do is get one side. And anybody who defends them, oh, you just don't want to pay child support, you're a deadbeat dad, or you support deadbeat dads. And you can't have debate on child support if anyone who wants to reform the system is immediate, oh, you just want to, support deadbeat dads. Then there's no arguments, there's no debate then. That was the point I was making. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's changed. Because the system in all states is jacked up to one degree or another. My case is in North Carolina, and it almost I don't want to say it goes the other way, but the child support is so tiny that it actually hurts parents, I think, in North Carolina. The
Really?
custodian, yeah, it's like 100,000 if you make that. You probably pay less than $1,000, depending on
That's
how many.
crazy.
Right,
That's
yeah,
absolutely crazy.
they have a system that's extremely like generous to the non-custodial parent, but you
Let
can't.
me let me just put one example out there for you
Right.
before we move on. In
Mhm,
2014, I was
mhm.
making $50,000 and I was paying 1508 a month in child support.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
that's
you're saying that
crazy.
someone making 100,000 is
In
paying
North
a
Carolina,
thousand
about
dollars. Do you see
roughly.
the difference here?
Right. But look, the people will say states right. Though I don't think the
Oh,
cost of
sure,
living,
that's
right,
right. And that's
right.
it's my state, and I'm a state legislator, and I have the right to object.
Right. I don't think the cost of living is any less or that much more in South Dakota. It is based on the
It's
cost of
less.
living.
South Dakota is one of the cheapest places to live.
Right.
But
Well,
yet our child support obligations are much higher, or 50%
right.
higher than that's
Right.
ridiculous.
No, I don't like child support, period, because I think it monetizes custody. A friend of mine said that. It absolutely what it does is it incentivizes going for custody for reasons besides you want to take care of the kids.
Absolutely,
Absolutely
100%.
right. It does that. I don't know if abolish is the right thing, but I would reduce it significantly. Rich, you got any other questions?
We finally found
Yeah,
something to agree on, Michael.
Yeah, no, we do. Yeah.
I want some other issues. I did a little research on South Dakota politics and legal issues. Let's talk about taxes and the economy. South Dakota is enjoying strong revenues, and last year the legislature temporarily cut the state sales tax from 4.5% down to 4.2%. That lower rate is scheduled to sunset in a few years, reverting back to the 4.5% in 2027. A couple of questions. Do you support making that 4.2% sales tax rate permanent? And as we head to the 2026 midterm, more broadly, what's your vision for tax and budget policy? Should the state be looking at additional tax relief for citizens? Should the state be investing in certain areas? Or should the state eliminate sales tax on groceries, as some people have proposed? What's your take?
Yeah, well, thank you for moving on. This is a fun topic as well. So, it actually wasn't last year. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that we actually lowered the sales tax down from 4.5% to 4.2%. I did support that as well. This year we had legislation to make that tax holiday, as I like to call it now, because the Senate at the time refused to make that permanent. They put the sunset on as July of 2027, as you noted. We had a bill to remove the sunset and make that permanent. I did support that as well. I do believe that South Dakota can meet its obligations as a government entity at a 4.2% sales tax. Now, that idea to remove the sunset failed. At this time, it looks like the sunset's still on, and the sales tax is going to go back up to 4.5 next year. Again, we have another legislative session next year, so we'll see what happens. Right now, our economy is doing fairly well, and we're doing okay. But I've talked to appropriators and people that are economists that are looking into the future, and things might not be so great on the horizon. That's what some are forecasting. So we'll just have to see what happens. But at this point in time, I do believe that South Dakota can continue to pay its bills and take care of its obligations at the 4.2%, but we're going to see what happens in the future. South Dakota right now, we have a reserves of about 16% in our for our rainy day fund, and we're looking to take that actually down. The governor proposed at 12.5%. Some legislators want to go to 10%. I think we're going to land somewhere in the middle, but that's kind of what's going on here in South Dakota as far as the funds go. What was the second part of your question? I forget now.
What do you think should be happening with additional tax relief for citizens?
Oh,
Should there be additional tax relief, or should the government take the money and not do tax relief, but maybe do direct investments in certain areas?
sure.
And one of the proposals I saw was they eliminate sales tax on groceries.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, on the idea of no sales tax on groceries, I have always supported that in the future or in the past. We didn't really have a bill submitted this year to do that. I know Governor Nome ran on that her second term, and I supported her in that effort. But unfortunately, that just never came to fruition because the number of legislators here in South Dakota didn't support that idea. South Dakota has built its government on having a really broad but low sales tax base, right? We have it was at 4% for the longest time. It went up to 4.5, now it's 4.2. It's been in that range for decades. But we tax everything, right? We do have some sales tax exemptions, but we have a large amount of just taxing everything at that low rate. And so that's really how we have built our government and how we fund our government by doing that. So I don't know at this time if removing the sales tax on food would necessarily be the best, just based on where we are with what's coming ahead of us. Now, I will say that probably the biggest thing for tax relief in South Dakota is in the area of property taxes. So that's been the major discussion that we've had in the legislature the last couple of years. But it's interesting because the state government actually doesn't take in one dime of property taxes. Property taxes in South Dakota go to the local governments. They go to the counties, and they go to the school boards, and they go to municipalities. So really, the problem we have in South Dakota is that our school districts are taking in about 55 or 60% of our property taxes, and there may or may not be a spending issue at that level of government. The other issue we're having is that when COVID hit, people discovered that living in a blue state wasn't necessarily the most fun, and there was a certain governor in South Dakota that said, "Hey, move to South Dakota. We're open for business," and everybody and their dog started moving to South Dakota, and because of that, we had a housing shortage, and also because of that, property valuations skyrocketed. When property valuations skyrocketed, so did property taxes. So that's the kind of the problem that we're living with here. Incomes have not kept up with the skyrocketing property taxes, and we're getting some people that are getting taxed out of their houses.
So Governor DeSantis, I don't know if this is going to become a proposal, but he argues that property taxes is unlike
Passed
any
it. They
other.
passed it, Mike. They passed it.
They
There's no
passed
property
this.
tax in Florida anymore. Start next year.
His argument is, you go to the store, you buy something, sales tax. You make money, income tax. Property taxes year after year. I agree with that philosophically, but can something like that work fiscally in South Dakota? Can you just eliminate it after the first year? I understand what he means, but the schools need to be funded. Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing is, Florida is primarily all of their tax base is from, not primarily, but a lot more from tourists. And you guys aren't that warm, so you can't count on the
Hey,
tourist business that Florida
hey now,
gets.
hey now, we have actually quite a bit of tourism here in South Dakota. We have the Sturgis Rally, we have
Right,
pheasant hunting,
right.
so we have
The
quite a bit of
Sturgis
we.
Rally is the bicycle the bikers. with
That's
some of
right.
the biker gangs. I know because I look at the biker gangs. But
And I don't know
well,
if you know this,
Mike? Were
but
you part of a biker gang, Mike? Are we
not
getting
one
to
one of the
the
99
sordid
or not
history of
one of the
Mike Volk
99
bike?
percenters. Definitely not a 1 percenter. I watch a lot of stuff on the biker gangs. But
You're a
is
veritable son
that
of
so?
anarchy, Michael.
So what DeSantis said, is that something you could support, and could that work fiscally to either eliminate or to only tax at one time?
well, I want to get to that question. But first, I need to know: are you part of a biker gang?
No, I'm not. But I love documentaries on criminals. So Taco Bowman and
Um,
those guys, I've seen all the documentaries. I know all
yeah,
the
and
biker gangs. Yeah.
okay, okay, just had to check there.
Right.
I don't know if you know this also in regards to tourism in South Dakota, but out in the Black Hills, we have this mountain that has some presidents' faces carved into them,
Right. Yeah.
and that brings a few people to the state too
Right.
to see that.
Right. All right. So you
Okay,
have,
just
but nothing like, but Florida's
I know, I
like
know, I know,
it's
but
massive.
yeah,
Right.
to be serious, we do have quite a bit of sales tax generated from tourism as well, but probably not quite as much as Florida. And Florida has a lot more people too. Let's be honest, right? So there's a lot more generation there. But also, our government is smaller in South Dakota, and we pride ourselves on having a small, limited government. That's something that's been
But can you?
part of our
But
government, part of our statehood.
what he proposed, is that feasible? And well, first of all, do you agree with it? And then, is it feasible?
Okay, I'll get to your question finally. So philosophically, yes, I would. I think that having a tax on your house and your property is wrong, right? Because in essence, you are continuously renting your property, your home from the government. If you don't pay your property taxes, guess what happens? The
They'll
government
take
comes
it.
and takes your house. That's wrong. However, if you're going to continue, if you're going to completely eliminate property taxes, you have to come up with some other funding source.
Mhm.
And so to say that you're going to do that from sales tax or you're going to do that from an income tax, well, South Dakota doesn't have an income tax, right? We're one of
Mhm.
7 states that doesn't do that either. So we fund our local governments through property tax. We fund our state government through sales tax. There have been ideas thrown out this year, and one of them's there's a couple of them still alive, where we are going to offset the costs of property taxes through sales tax revenue. One idea, because and this is why the tax holiday to stay at 4.2 died, because there's a number of legislators that want to use that 0.3% for to offset property tax relief. The governor also has an idea that he's going to give the counties the option to do a half a penny, a 0.5%, each county to allow for property tax relief on owner occupied too. So, okay, so to answer your question, I don't, I have a hard time believing that it's possible, right?
Right.
I mean, and also if you do completely eliminate property taxes on all property in South Dakota, that creates another problem. There's an unintended consequence. Because South Dakota is a relatively cheaper place to buy property, you're going to have people that come from out of state and buy up a large amount of farmland and ground in South Dakota. We've already seen that. Ted Turner owns a boatload of land in West River, South Dakota. So I think that that might even further um, make that issue worse. So I would like to see, I do think that there needs to be property tax relief for owner occupied in the state of South Dakota, because it is somewhat immoral to tax people out of their house. And we are seeing that with some of the elderly. They're on a fixed income, and these evaluations I talked about earlier are skyrocketing, and therefore your property taxes have been going up 40% in 1 year in some places. And so literally people that are retired are going and becoming greeters at Walmart again just so they can pay their property taxes.
And I
So
think
with
that's
all
I
that
think
said, it's quite the quandary, right? And nobody has been smart enough to be able to figure this out. So we have ideas in the works to fix this or to alleviate some of the pain. But we're going to see what comes out of this. It might be the governor's idea where the counties can levy a sales tax.
which I think is fairer, because the sales tax is, and I think Governor Huckabee, when he was running for president, that was his argument, that
Well,
eliminate the.
is it fair to the person that rents? Is the low income person that rents and still has to buy food and they pay sales tax and then they give me property tax relief as someone who makes a little bit more
Right,
and has a
right, but
house?
right. Well, definitely you have to buy things, but the sales tax is based on a proactive thing that you're doing,
For sure.
whereas the property tax you're just living.
The problem you're getting into is the only economically the real solution on this is a VAT, but that's so European, it's so foreign to the American system. Well, if you look at some of the places, a VAT would fix it with exemptions. So beef would have zero tax, right? Goods that are necessary would have zero tax. If you buy a foreign sports car, if you buy something that's a luxury, that gets the crap taxed out of it with a VAT. So you control your consumption, but you don't punish people for things that they need. That's the real answer, but nobody wants to talk in VAT terms because it's European, and nobody wants to be a dainty European. But so my question for you, Tom, now I want to switch gears again to an issue that's near to my heart, is gun rights. Okay, it's a prominent topic in South Dakota and nationally, and on the state level, you sponsored SB 81 in 2025 that pushes back against gun tracking and it forbids the use of credit card codes to identify firearm purchases. Can you explain the intent behind that law, why you saw it as necessary, and more generally, what's your stance on the Second Amendment issues and the push for gun control at the federal level, and how should people like Republicans or gun rights advocates in a state like South Dakota address these debates as 2026 midterms approach?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I don't know if you'll find a stronger supporter of your gun rights than the person you're talking to here. Obviously, so if I remember right, that bill we had last year would allow. Well, right now, credit card companies are starting to get into the idea of putting a merchant code when you purchase. I think when you purchase a gun from one of those from a place that sells guns, right? And so if that information could be sold or whatever it may be, it would prevent someone from using that information against you, knowing that you own a gun. If I'm remembering the legislation right, you have to give me some grace here because we deal with so many issues in such a short amount of time, and now you're talking about a bill that was from last year. But if I'm remembering the right, that's kind of what that legislation did, is so it prevented that from you being tracked.
It sounds like the cousin of like a social credit rating system. If you have a gun, then they can take
something
you.
with that. Tied into that too. You're right. Okay, so it just prevents that from that being used against you from anybody that may think that they want to track your purchase of a firearm. And so I just think that's appropriate. I guess I don't think that should be used against you.
In general, in South Dakota, how would you describe the Second Amendment as compared to the average state? Is it easy to get a gun? Is it easy to get a concealed carry permit? How accessible are guns to someone who wants to own one?
Well, I would say they're fairly accessible. I mean, I can go down to my local hardware store a mile away from me right now and purchase a firearm. But I mean, you still have the federal background check. You still got to go through all that. But at the state level, there is really no restriction from you. I mean, as long as you're
constitutional carry out there in South Dakota?
Yes, we are. In fact, that was that was the first bill we put on Governor Noem's desk, was constitutional carry. The previous governor, Mr. Dugard, he had vetoed that bill twice, and that was one of the things that we ensured when Governor Noem was elected, is that she was going to sign that bill, and South Dakota became the next state at that point to be a constitutional carry. So, in essence, the Second Amendment is my constitutional carry, is my gun permit.
You
see, Mike, Kristi Noem don't mess around. That's why I love her.
Yeah, it's not exactly
Kristi
the
has
way
some
it
good things
works
about her.
right. It's not exactly the way it works in Illinois, but and
unfortunately, you're correct.
I disagree with that in our state entirely. All right, Rich, any other questions you got?
Well, last thing on something you did. And it's an interesting issue to me only because it's something that I don't really see, and it's Native American state tribal relations. I'm down in Florida, so the biggest thing I get is going to the casino. But you have the big issues. It's a big issue in South Dakota, and one of the bills was SB 170, and you helped to pass to allow state brand boards to partner with Indian tribes investigating cattle thefts.
Hmm.
And so, tell me about that. It's an interesting issue to me about the state's relationship with the Indian tribes, and what areas do you see for collaboration and improvement with the Indian tribes?
Well, you are really digging into South Dakota politics when you're talking about the brand board and the tribes. So that's really good. Okay, so in South Dakota, we have this thing called the brand board, which applies to only ranchers west of the Missouri River. And so, uh, because of the landscape in western South Dakota, it's very wide open. The cattle roam on thousands and thousands of acres, and sometimes cattle theft is a thing that happens out there. So people brand their cattle, right? If you're familiar with how branding works, and the brand board keeps a track of everybody's brand in a log in a central location, so they can keep track of that. And so when they go to sell their cattle at a livestock auction, um, they have to be they're branded and they check with the inspector at the livestock inspection station, and it's just kind of a whole process. So some of the times that happens though, especially West River, South Dakota, is that we have tribal land as well. The tribes, there's been land set aside for tribes out there, and unfortunately, we don't. The county jurisdiction or county sheriffs don't have jurisdiction on some of this tribal land. So that's what that bill was aiming to solve, is that we have more cooperation between the tribal police and the local sheriffs of the counties, so that if there is some cattle theft, we can try to investigate on the tribal land.
It's like so totally interesting because I love Yellowstone. So this type of stuff with like the cattle theft, the ranchers, and everything else, it's like totally cool to me. So
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if you're familiar, but the price of cattle and the price of beef is really high right now. And so if you go and steal just even, 10 heifers out of somebody's pasture, you're looking at $20,000 right there. So if not more, I mean, it's a big deal. So
I got one last question. You said you voted for Trump a whole bunch of times, but I think you describe yourself as a fiscal conservative. Do you agree with his budget policies? He's running up $2 trillion deficit. Somehow in South Dakota, you guys run a balance for every state, even the state of New York. They tax like crazy in California. Do you do you agree with his budget policies? Well, first of all, are you a fiscal conservative, and then do you agree with his budget policies?
I would describe myself as a fiscal conservative. And do I agree with Trump's fiscal policies? No.
All right, Rich. Anything else?
He spends too much money for my liking.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
And he was really good about staying out of foreign wars in his first term, and he hasn't been so good about that in his second term.
I
And I'm
I
disappointed about that.
I agree with that as well. He's unencumbered. All right. Last question. Anything else you want to add? Ask yourself a question and answer it if you want. Anything else that we missed?
that's what we do. We usually have our guests ask a question of themselves and then answer it. So not
Oh,
to put you on
wow.
the spot, Tom, but
Or just give a statement based on any question you want.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really appreciate I don't know where this is going to get broadcast or how big of a following you guys have, but I guess I just appreciate the opportunity to give more. Give more sunlight, give more transparency to the issue of shared parenting. I think, I mean, we may disagree on it here as three people, but it's great to have the conversation about it. There's nothing more important to me than having both loving parents involved in a child's life. It doesn't have to land on 50-50 exactly. It doesn't have to land on 30 minutes of every hour, but
Mhm.
having a involved parent who loves his child, to just be involved, if that's a 60-40, a 65-35, whatever it may be. I just think that that's really, really important to society and to those kids. So,
I I
those
agree.
kids need to know that you're there. They need to know that both parents love them. And so just giving more publicity to that issue is really important to me. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that.
Anytime. And I think the biggest problem with the family court issue is there's not enough debate. That's one reason why I
Yeah.
wanted to do this. Uh, People are unaware of it. They don't understand any of it, so they
Yeah.
don't know what to support because they've never seen the issue debated or the arguments made and the pros and cons of anything. So that's
Yeah.
the
You're
most
absolutely
important.
Yeah,
But
you're absolutely correct. Most people they go through this, and a lot of times, your kids aren't as young as mine were, and so I've been in this fight for a long, long time. A lot of times, parents get divorced, and their kids are more in the teenager years, and they only have a few years to go before they're out of the system. I've
right,
been living in this system for 12 years now, and and my kids are the ages of 12 to 16 at this point. So. I still have a few years to go, and I'm still going to continue talking about this for as long as it takes. But I understand how the fight kind of goes away, and nobody really wants to talk about it as far as the laws go because they moved on, right? And so I'm still in that fight, and I'm trying to bring more transparency and just have that conversation all across the country if possible. So
all
thank you
right.
for the opportunity.
State Senator Tom Pischke, thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.